Hey folks, sorry how part one ended so fast. I reached the 4 gig limit on the upload stream, so I so it just cuts off right when I'm talking about something. But just briefly recap. In part one, I describe what's happening inside of the 700 lineal feet of garden row here. I discussed the planter boxes over there by the fence. I discussed these planter boxes and just a little bit about the garden philosophy that we're employing here. And I didn't actually explicitly say this in part one, but you were actually looking at a gardenscape that um, has had no input of how can I say this quickly? It's had no input of topsoil, trucked in compost, manures of any kind, chicken scratch of any kind, no blood meal, no bone meal, no nothing. It is completely devoid of I guess I would say any kind of livestock or animal byproduct input entirely. And it's also devoid of trucking in any tilth or organic material of any kind outside of wood chips, which can be made on site or picked up down at the village where they chip up the trees that they clear from the power lines. And so, yes, the wood chips do eventually break down into organic material, but I don't really necessarily consider that to be a topical applicant to the beds themselves for building tilth. And it wasn't until um, the biological event overtaking the world happened that I actually have purchased a little bit of water soluble fertilizers, specifically as a hedge against being able to make sure I can grow a lot of food. And I really enjoy experimenting, and I've really enjoyed what's happened here, doing everything what I believe is to be the hard way and not using any of the horse manure that you can get from the equine places down the road, or using anything really, just starting with some bare land and just having at it and trying to do your own on-site composting and mulching and green manures and things like that. And so with the biological event happening around the world, it's been, it's changed the context now is that I may really need to rely on this space to truly feed myself and some of my friends and people that are close to me. And so because of that, if needed, I will be selectively fertilizing this space because I'm not willing to take any chances. However, the moment that it looks like um you know there's no potential detriment to my local food security of any kind, then I'll go back to doing everything the hard way. So anyway, that being said, we have garlic here. Garlic was planted in, oh my gosh, I almost think early December. Early December this garlic was planted, and if you can tell, it's actually starting to get pretty close to being ready to come out. And you know I don't fancy myself particularly as being good at growing any of this stuff. However, um, I do find it pretty enjoyable to just try to grow everything, everything humanly possible. And the garlic looks pretty good. Now you see a lot of little crappy looking garlics kind of all over in here. Those are garlics from garlic bubules that were planted the previous year. Oh, look at this. Look how cute this is. There's two. There's two, I think, ladybirds getting it on. That makes me very happy to see. And so this is kind of just a mixed mash. You can see, if you see like the larger garlics with the perfect row spacing, those ones we actually care about. However, my experiment with growing garlic from bubules actually did really well. And it just so happens that I literally threw a few armloads of bubules that were starting to rot because I had stored them improperly out here, and they've just been growing like grass ever since. Here is the newest row planting. I didn't mention it in the part 1 of brassicas, and also believe this is plain old bok choy. And as you can tell, this has been predated really hard. You know, these leaves have just been Swiss cheesed by these little guys right here. You might not be able to see it, but right there, you see right above my finger? It's a flea beetle. They have been merciless this year. This is the worst year we've had for them yet. And I don't really know why. I think the lack of rain, perhaps, that we've had, the severe lack of rain has, I think, seemed to have emboldened them or suppressed one of the natural predators for them. However, natural predators, if you look here, you'll see I've put up a dozen little bird boxes on all the fence posts. The bird box is sized specifically for chickadees and a couple other handful of relatively small, very garden-friendly birds. You can't see it because I don't think I can zoom in, but let me see if I can zoom in. Nope, I can't zoom. Anyway, right there on the top of that little bird's nest, there's a tiny little bird this big. He's just yelling his head off. Wonder what his partner is probably late from the grocery store. Anyway, you know, I still eat this. This is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite, you know, shoulder season crops. And the trick to these things is that this first harvest, you know, is going to be kind of gross, and I'm probably not going to feed any house guests with this, you know, just decimated, you know, Asian style cabbage. However, when you cut these, don't rip them out. What you can do is cut them like right about here, so that way you can preserve. If you cut them right about here, you preserve the kind of the core, or I guess the crown, that's generating the new growth. And then within a couple weeks, you'll have another head almost this large. It's incredible. And now that the flea beetle pressure is dramatically reducing, I think that the next round of cut and come again bok choy is actually going to be a lot cleaner than this, with less pest damage. And here is a second year asparagus patch. It was mentioned briefly in a previous video comparing the second year asparagus to the third year asparagus, which is these big monsters right here. And it's still putting up lots of spears down here, but I think that we're just going to let them go now, because the plants didn't put out as many spears as I expected. And so I think that the asparagus is beginning to feel pressure from all these native plants and the goldenrod. And I also think that the lack of rain and the weird climate we had this spring, I think, really slowed them down. And so over here we have this cute little walking bridge a friend of mine made, and you can't really tell, but there is just a flurry of critters in here. And it's really low because, like I said, it hasn't rained. And it's funny, it's cloudy because there were so many tadpoles that just took off. Oh, there's a couple. There were so many tadpoles that took off that it actually caused the water to get cloudy. And one of my favorite things in the world right now, which you won't be able to see because I don't think they're around, is there's baby salamanders or newts in here right now. And they're adorable because they look like a salamander. They're about that long, but they've got the external lungs. So they're just the cutest things you've ever seen. And this pondscape is critical to this entire operation. And this pond is basically usually the water level is, a foot higher than this minimum almost all summer long. But like I said, we're in what I would call this a drought now, even though it actually rained 0.5 of an inch today, amazingly. This pond should have much more water in it. However, regardless, it still has a pretty good ecosystem for amphibians. And so what happens is that this pond system, it's two separate ponds. This one is about 55 to 60 feet in length, and this one is circular and about 24 feet in diameter. And it's hard to see. It's hard to really see. I'll hold my arm up here because the cattails and the reeds are so tall that it makes it very difficult to kind of see the pond itself. But this does multiple things. This does multiple things. One of the most direct benefits is that the amphibians that live in this pond leave this pond almost daily or nightly and go into the garden and eat slugs and eat other, they eat cutworms, they eat the slugs, they eat pretty much everything that eats the food that I want to eat, they like. And so I want them to have it. So these are my frontline foot soldiers against slug pressure in the garden. And it's funny, actually, this year we actually had a little bit of a pond disaster. And this is the 4th year this pond's been around, and the amphibians are just thick in here now. They love it. I believe they sleep in the muck in the wintertime. There's 2 or 3 painted turtles that lives in here now. But this year, for the first time, 4 bullfrogs showed up, full-size bullfrogs, and also 2 northern water snakes showed up. And those bullfrogs and those water snakes just gave hell to the green frogs and toads that use this pond. Just gave them hell. I mean, almost ate every single one of them. So the water snakes have been elusive, but the bullfrogs we caught and then transported down to the big pond just down the hill. And I'm sure the bullfrogs are awfully angry at us for moving them, but it's allowing the environment here to start to recover from just getting an absolute, just absolutely destroyed the frog population here. And so the amphibians that come out of the pond eat the slugs. 2, rabbits, groundhogs, gophers, and deer don't cross this. And so before we had put up this kind of light duty fence to kind of push the deer out, the primary defense for the garden was that the deer would have to walk around this to get in here into the garden before the garden doubled in size from 50-foot beds to 100-foot beds. And the deer would think twice a little bit. Obviously they eventually figured out how to walk around, but it does help. And it does help. It just creates a physical barrier. And if I were to do this again, which I probably will at some point, if I were to recreate, based upon what I've learned, I would actually use a pond system like this. I would use a pond system like this. I would say an average of 12 to 16 foot wide, preferably 4 or more feet deep of a pond system. And I would make a literal moat. I would actually make a moat with 1 or 2 small land bridges, or no land bridge at all, only a couple constructed bridges for getting in and out. And I know that sounds insane, but it gives you such precise control over what you're doing inside your garden. For example, if you made a proper moat, if I had a proper moat and this thing extended and went outside that fence and went around and, connected over here, and there's only a handful of places, 10, 15 feet wide where you would enter that was non, that was, a land bridge, around the moat. I believe there would be basically no slugs ever. Now, there's not many here, but this year was worse than normal, specifically because the frog population was reduced to near zero. But still, for this climate, we have very, very little slugs. But you would also basically have no rabbits, no gophers, no groundhogs, no nothing. And if it gets in, yell at it and wave your arms and it'll run out and it might not come back in for the rest of the year. And so I would make a moat, and I actually think that it can afford you so much security. And not only that, it's beautiful. It brings in dragonflies, and it it creates a mosquito sink because the mosquito lays its eggs in here, they hatch, and then everything eats the mosquitoes. And so you want mosquitoes laying eggs in a pond like this and not out in some diurnal forest pond somewhere where there's no predators. And so it's going to be, a full breeding situation. Over here on the other side of the pond, this is not really particularly aggressively managed space. We've got 2 berms right here that wrap around the pond, and you can't really tell, but these are Jerusalem artichokes. And yes, I already know what you're going to say. I'm going to lose my whole yard to these things, and you are correct, and that is okay, because I've watched them now for 3 years, and I now know exactly how fast they spread. And I think that due to the contour of the pond, I have approximately 10 years before these decide to take over all hell in creation. Um, and so in the meantime, though, I have a tremendous food battery here that seems to be an inexhaustible amount of Jerusalem artichokes. And I'll show you something interesting. Let me put the camera down and hold it up. So if you see the spot right here, if you see that spot right here where it's a little thinner, this is about a 3-foot circle, was a 3-foot circle that I tried to harvest every single tuber from. Every single tuber from. And if you look, I succeeded in creating a little bit of a hole. And so just a little bit of a hole. And now, of course, those gains are gone, and it's going to just fill in, and it's going to turn into, doom. But that's okay. This is a food security issue. This is important to me to have. They're also beautiful perennial sunflowers, and I'm gifting almost this entire space to them. And so we'll see. And over here is many, many different medicinal plants that we've been growing over here on this side of the fence for quite a while. And, also letting all the wildflowers grow. There's some red clover in here, and have some berry bushes just put in earlier today. And that's pretty much it for the general overview of the kind of the immediate garden tour. Now, there is actually a new 300-foot, 2-foot wide bed on the outside of the fence that runs the entire fence row. And I did that this year because we're going to be moving all of the allium family plants from this space out there, because the deer and the predators won't eat them. And so when we harvest the garlic, this row is going to turn into probably either more asparagus or just another perennial or annual that we really like. And there is actually a berry patch over there and a handful of blueberry trees. But we can talk about those later. And other than that, I guess just leave some comments if anyone wants to know anything specific about why you see something the way that it is. And for the most part, most things here are quite intentional, even if it looks like pure neglect. And so I would just love to know what anyone wants to know more about. And I can talk about this stuff for days. But, like, for example, over here, this is a big area that was basically a swamp, and now it is mostly just grasses and soybeans. And these soybeans are not going to do particularly well, but it'll give us some soybeans. Not a lot, but that's okay. And we're going to plant something here next year. I'm not sure what yet. And this flag in the ground, this is something that I'm going to hopefully be able to talk about several more times, because it's the cutest thing ever. But a female common snapping turtle laid eggs right there. Now, there's no snapping turtle in the pond, so I don't know where it came from. It may have came from the big pond down the hill over that direction, but it found this nice patch of dry dirt, came right up here, and I wasn't home that day, but she laid all the clutch of eggs right there. Are they clutches of eggs if they're snapping turtles? Anyway, it's adorable, and I cannot wait to have the ground erupt with baby dinosaurs, and that's what's going to happen here. And so this marker is here to mark where they are. So we walk a couple feet around this all times, and I'm gonna call that a wrap for the late June garden tour. And I can do a deeper dive into any specific plants that you're curious about. I'm definitely going to do a couple specific videos on Malabar spinach and callaloo. And other than that, I can do another couple videos, maybe in another 3 or 4 weeks, of what this situation looks like. And I think it's going to look very different. And if anyone's also curious about the passive solar greenhouse, the passive solar house, and things like that, I can also make videos focused on those things. And yeah, so that's it. And so I hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe and not coughing on each other and not being coughed on. And other than that, I look forward to answering some questions. So thanks.